Welcome to Egypt. This is the land that's witnessed many a mighty drama in its long and varied history. But none have been of more enduring significance than when one of its ancient pharaohs found his will in direct confrontation with the will of Almighty God, as expressed through his servant Moses.
It's Genesis, the first book in the Bible, that relates how Moses' own people, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, came to be here in Egypt, and of how God enabled Abraham's grandson Joseph to save Egypt from total destruction during a terrible famine. The Pharaoh of that time had had a dream. He was standing on the bank of the Nile, doubtless acutely aware of the river's vital importance to the whole life of Egypt. Without it, the whole country would be a barren desert. Even so, here, as at some other places, the desert does come perilously close to the river itself. But for much of its course, there's a somewhat wider strip of rich agricultural land on both sides. In his dream, the Pharaoh saw cows coming up out of the river and grazing on the reeds. There were 7 of them, and they were fat and sleek. Then 7 other cows, scrawny and thin, followed them, and they ate up the fat ones. But they still looked just as thin and ugly as before. Then the Pharaoh woke up. It was Joseph, Abraham's great-grandson, whom God enabled to reveal the dream's interpretation to Pharaoh. There'll be 7 years of great plenty, followed by 7 years of famine, he told him. So let Pharaoh appoint a wise and discreet man and set him over Egypt. Store up 1/5 of the harvest of the good years to be a reserve for the years of famine. And so it all came to pass. And Joseph was the man Pharaoh chose to be in command. He must have required massive storage silos throughout the land for such gigantic quantities of grain. These great shafts at Saqqara are part of an enormous complex over which this step pyramid towers triumphantly. It's the very first pyramid, and it was designed by Imhotep, the foremost minister of Djoser, king of Lower Egypt. Imhotep's life and Joseph's are startlingly similar in detail. Indeed, many today consider them to have been the same person. If so, then these very shafts may well have been built at Joseph's command to house the great grain surplus. And this whole well-fortified complex may have been Joseph's administrative centre, to which people came from far and wide to buy grain. Perhaps it was before this forbidding entrance that his own brothers from Canaan joined the queue. So God enabled him to save not only the Egyptians from total destruction, but also his own family, Abraham's descendants. The famine was equally severe up the coast in Canaan, so Joseph arranged for them to emigrate from there and settle here in the region of Goshen. So that, the Bible records, is how the people of Israel came to be here in Egypt. The Egyptians had a very great deal for which to be thankful to the Israelites. But 400 years later, these events have long since been forgotten, and Joseph's descendants have become so numerous that a new Pharaoh fears them. He orders that all the newborn Hebrew baby boys should be thrown into the Nile. Let's just imagine the anguish of Moses' mother as she put him in a basket of bulrushes and entrusted him into the hands of God as she placed it among the reeds in this crocodile-infested river. Well, Pharaoh wanted this little boy dead, but God wanted him alive, and saw to it that he's saved by the Pharaoh's own daughter, who brought him up in the Egyptian court as her own adopted son. So Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and deeds. The immense remains here at Karnak are an awesome reminder of the sheer might of the Egyptian civilization, which persisted, little changed, for over 3,000 years.
This wilderness of ruins is amazing evidence of the devotion of the pharaohs to the great god of Thebes, Amun-Ra himself.
In whichever actual period he lived, we can only guess at the conflict Moses experienced between his Egyptian and Hebrew cultures. But he never lost either his sense of Hebrew identity or his hot indignation over his people's sufferings. The evidence for them was all around, not least in the mud bricks the Egyptians forced the Hebrews to make with which to build their great projects. In the mud pits of slavery they toiled, for day after day, year after year, century after century. It's no wonder they cried out to God for a deliverer. By the time he was 40, Moses could stand the oppression of his people no longer. Seeing an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, he killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. He thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them. But they didn't. "Who made you a ruler and judge over us?" was all the thanks he got. When the Pharaoh learnt of Moses' action, he tried to kill Moses. And so Moses had to flee for his life, away from all the influence, prestige, money, and fame which had been his. But where exactly did he go? The traditional route has always considered he fled into the Sinai Peninsula, where St. Catherine's Monastery commemorates the momentous events that were to follow. Or was this location still too close for comfort? Moses must have had Pharaoh's search parties after him. Did he perhaps instead take the trade route across the top of Sinai, skirt the northern tip of the Gulf of Aqaba, and find safety and solitude on its eastern shore, in the land of Midian? Whichever route he took, he must have felt a forsaken man, without a country, without a hope. All around is desolation. Here granite sentinels stand as towers of living death to bar one's way, and the sun blazes down in its scorching fury.
Into such awesome desolation as this, a man who walked with princes now walks alone. Moses' sense of that failure must have been overwhelming. He couldn't see how the situation could be remedied or reversed. Little did he know that it's in wilderness like this that the men of God are purged and refined for God's great purpose.
And he found strength from a fruit-laden palm tree, and life-giving water flowing from the well of Midian. Here he encountered typical Bedouin hospitality in the tents of Jethro, the priest of Midian. And it's good to find such hospitality persisting right down through the centuries to today. It's certainly more than welcome in these barren surroundings. There's even the good old cup of tea.
It was lovely, wasn't it?
Moses was content to dwell here, and Jethro gave him his daughter Zipporah in marriage. The next 40 years seem to have been, not surprisingly, long years of depression for Moses. He who had been at the pinnacle of world power was now in charge of nothing more than a flock of sheep. Although Zipporah bore him a son, Moses betrayed his loneliness by naming him Gershom, which means alien. I've become an alien in a foreign land.
Now Moses was minding the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the far side of the wilderness, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. It was here that an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. And Moses looked and he saw, and although the bush was on fire, it wasn't being burnt up. And Moses said, I will turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not being consumed. And when God saw that he turned aside to see, the angel of the Lord called to him from the midst of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Take off your shoes from off your feet, for the ground on which you're standing is holy ground.
This momentous encounter has been commemorated here at St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of the mountain for around 1700 years. The massive fortress wall all around it was built by the Emperor Justinian in the 6th century to protect the monks from repeated Arab attacks. This penthouse used to provide the only means of entry. You had to be hauled up into it. Today there's a doorway, but it's only a very small one. Inside, it's like a miniature town of the Middle Ages, with its narrow, crooked streets, its closely compacted buildings, and its many different architectural styles. Everything's delightfully haphazard, and it all tells of centuries of readjustment within the protecting walls. The monastery certainly wasn't designed to accommodate today's great influx of pilgrims and tourists. They're all irresistibly drawn to this bush. Could it possibly be the descendant of the burning bush itself? It's certainly a great attraction, and a potent reminder that it was at such a bush that God told Moses, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So Moses said farewell to the tents of Jethro, took his wife and sons, and started back to Egypt. And he took the staff of God in his hand. We can only guess at Moses' emotions as he set off, very reluctantly, to confront the great ruler of the most powerful nation on earth. The civilization of ancient Egypt flourished little changed for around 3,000 years. To this day, reminders of the power of Egypt's amazing pharaohs permeate the whole land. From the mighty pyramids in the north, old even in Moses' day, to the colossal limestone statue of Ramses II further south at Memphis, and not least, in the far south, the great temple of Abu Simbel in Upper Egypt. It's a breathtaking sight, hewn out of the solid cliff in the 13th century BC, in honour once again of Ramses II. He's shown here wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt.
It's just awesome to stand here beneath these towering figures. Many consider that it was this Ramses, who was the pharaoh, who found himself in direct confrontation with the will of God as expressed through Moses. This is what the Lord God of Israel says, "Let my people go, that they may serve me."
Just alongside is a smaller temple Ramses built to honour his favourite wife Nefertari. Was it perhaps her son who was to feature so prominently in the impending drama?
As Pharaoh's heart became ever harder and his resistance to God's will ever stronger, Moses told him, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Israel is my firstborn son, but you refuse to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn son."
And so, as the sun sank over the Nile that night, the angel of the Lord struck down all the firstborn of the Egyptians. And there arose a great cry in Egypt, because there was not a house in which one was not dead. And Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Go out from among us, you and your people. I set you free." It's from the land of Goshen in the Nile Delta, and probably from around the great cities of Tanis or Avaris, that they set out. Tanis was the capital of Egypt for about 200 years. The present remains have been excavated from beneath the massive silt covering which the annual flooding of the Nile constantly deposited along its banks. There's a great poignancy about the eerie desolation of these lonely remains. The pride of this once very great city is no more. Its fallen images, a picture of how God puts down the mighty from their thrones, as indeed he did with Pharaoh on that fateful night. The disaster and destruction of which these ruins are a silent witness are a telling reminder to us, even today, of the judgment of God which fell on the whole land that night. Only those who had obeyed God's command to put the blood of a lamb on their doorposts were to be saved. And so it's from this now silt-covered region that the great Exodus was to set out on its epic adventure. But from here, near Pi-Ramesses in the Nile Delta, which route did they take? God didn't lead them along this coastal road, though that way to the Promised Land was far shorter. There would have been Egyptian forts every 8 miles or so. So instead, he led them across the Sinai desert, towards the northern tip of the Red Sea, today's Gulf of Aqaba. Across this vast and dreadful desert they must have come, Moses leading 600,000 men, not counting women and children. By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud, and by night in a pillar of fire to guide them. Meanwhile, Pharaoh changed his mind. "What have we done? We have let them go and we have lost their services." So he set off in hot pursuit with 600 of his best chariots, along with all the other chariots in Egypt. As the great Exodus was traversing Sinai, the Lord said to Moses, "Turn back and camp near Pi-Hahiroth between Migdol and the sea. Pharaoh will think that the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them." So at God's command, Moses led the great company on this totally unexpected and unintelligible detour. Unknown to him, millions of years earlier, a vast inland sea here had emptied itself into today's Red Sea, carving a great canyon through the solid rock. Driving through this canyon today, we can readily understand the unimaginable quantity of water, rocks and stone which must have swept along here, carving this defile ever deeper, before depositing itself into the Red Sea. The beach formed by this debris is so enormous that it's clearly visible from space. It's easily able to accommodate vast numbers of people and their herds. Today, the first sight of the Red Sea is a thrilling moment, but not so for the vast throng with Moses. The thunder of Pharaoh's best chariots and horses could be heard ever closer behind them. The mountains on either side of the canyon hemmed them in, thwarting any chance of escape, and the way ahead was barred by the sea itself. Could it have been Joshua, perhaps, Moses' assistant, who arrived first to assess the situation, which was becoming increasingly dire?
The Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians charging after them. They cried out to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die in the wilderness?" Moses said to them, "Stand firm, and you will see the salvation of the Lord. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again." The Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your staff over the water, and divide the water, that the people may cross on dry land. Moses lifted up his staff, and the Lord blew with a strong east wind all night, and parted the waters.
The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground. The debris which forms the vast beach continues beneath the sea here, establishing an underwater sandbar right across to the far side. But to its north and south, the sea is about a mile deep. So could it be that for a very long time God had been preparing the way for this great deliverance? The jagged, sharp sand from the canyon could easily support the weight of cattle and wagons. The Egyptians pursued them and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then, at God's command, the waters returned, covering Pharaoh's entire army. Not one of them survived. On the seabed today, we can see that coral has attached itself to objects which seem to resemble wreckage from such a disaster. Upturned wheel-like structures still appear to be attached to their axles, and the seabed itself is strewn with very many vivid reminders of that most momentous deliverance. So the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel never forgot the Exodus. From then till now, in every generation, each individual Jew is bound to regard himself as if he personally had gone forth from Egypt. In explaining the significance of their Passover celebrations to their children, Moses commanded them, "You shall tell your son, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt." And so it was through this vast and terrible terrain that Moses led the people ever onwards. God's presence went before them in a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night to guide them. They were a mixed multitude of all ages, 600,000, the Bible says, besides women and children. Many other people also went up with them, and very many cattle, both flocks and herds. Ever on they trudged through the great and terrible wilderness until at last the holy mountain comes into view. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, God had told Moses, you will worship me at this mountain. But where exactly is the real Mount Sinai? Many today consider it to be in the biblical land of Midian, today's Saudi Arabia. But it's in the Sinai Peninsula, around St. Catherine's Monastery, that these events have been remembered through the centuries. Its setting has always vividly recalled the dramatic description in the Bible. It was before such a mountain as this that Israel encamped. God told Moses to set a boundary around the foot of the mountain. If anyone crossed such limits as these, or touched the mountain, the awesome holiness of God demanded that they were not to be permitted to live. Whether man or beast, they were to be put to death. So here the nation of Israel stood before their God. 800 years earlier, God had promised Abraham that he would make his descendants into a mighty nation. And now he was to renew and extend that pledge of his blessing. So here God gave Israel his 10 commandments. Obeying them would be Israel's side of the covenant. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. So you shall have no other gods before me. So much happened here that much of 3 books of the Bible are devoted to it. It's no wonder the Israelites stayed here for nearly a whole year. God was giving them detailed instructions as to how they were to live as his holy people. Then, at God's command, they set out, his presence again going before them in a pillar of cloud and fire by night. Even for today's intrepid travellers, some not so young themselves, the going is rough in the extreme. One can but marvel at the awesomeness of the challenge God had given Moses. The people asked him to send men ahead of them to spy out the promised land and to report back. So Moses selected 12 men, one from each of their tribes, to do just that. And off they set, along beside the Dead Sea, the lowest place on earth, past the ancient city of Jericho, up into the hill country west of the Jordan, through all the country that would later bear the names of their 12 tribes, and ever on, past the Sea of Galilee, right up to Dan in the far north. Here the melted snows of Mount Hermon tumble as a mighty torrent teeming from the rock, bringing life and refreshment to the whole land. The water is for the river Jordan. The faith in God this nation were intended to show was to give life to the whole world. And so they started their homeward trek. Their top-secret exploration of every detail of the land continued. They saw its flocks and herds, its dusty roads and tracks, its livestock. They spied on its people and their way of life. They saw the incredible beauty of the land and its amazing variety. From the lush, fertile pasture land of the Jordan Valley to its scorching deserts. And from the salty waters of the Dead Sea, they made their way back safely to the Israelite camp. But sadly, their fear of the people of the land swamped their faith in God's promise. So they brought back a bad report, which made the community lose heart. "We've seen the whole land," they said. "The people who live there are very powerful. The cities are fortified and very large." Only 2 of the 12 spies, Caleb and Joshua, said, "We should go up and take possession of the land. God has promised to give it to us. It's a good land, a land flowing with milk and honey." But the whole community talked about stoning them. The Lord was deeply grieved. Not one of this evil generation will enter the land except Caleb and Joshua. Here in this desert they will die. And so, for 40 years, their children, all who were under 20, were shepherds in this area until the last of their parents had died. Only then did the Lord permit the journey to continue, and they found themselves back at the Gulf of Aqaba and at its northern end, where today's Israel and Jordan meet. Next time, we learn the fate of their faithless parents. We follow the Exodus route along the King's Highway and the people's passage around Edom. We remember the great blessing which Aaron pronounced on the people. And we pass Mount Hor, where he died and was buried. We explore the grazing land in Moab, where Israel were preparing to launch their attack on Canaan. And finally, we arrive at Mount Nebo, with its moving memorial commemorating the momentous climax of Moses' life. For all that and much more, join us again for part 2. The Lord was deeply grieved with Israel. 10 of the 12 spies had brought back a bad report of his promised land, and all the Israelites had grumbled. So the Lord swore in his fury, "As surely as my glory fills the whole earth, not one of this evil generation will ever see the land I promised to their forefathers. Only Caleb and Joshua were to be permitted to do so. As for the rest, God said, here, in this desert, they will die. And so, for 40 years, their children, all who were under 20, were shepherds in this area until the last of their parents had died. Only then did the Lord permit the journey to continue, and they found themselves back at the Gulf of Aqaba and at its northern end, where today's Israel and Jordan meet.
The first town in southern Jordan mentioned in the Great Exodus drama is Ezion-Geber, a port town at or near Jordan's Red Sea port resort of Aqaba.
This is Jordan's only outlet to the sea and a popular holiday destination. Almost 60% of Jordan's imports and exports pass via here, so the port's strategic to the country's economy. Aqaba's location is unique. Eilat in Israel is only 10 minutes away, and Saudi Arabia is just 20 kilometers down the coast. Egypt itself is only a swift 45-minute hydrofoil trip across the water. The people of Israel must have been thrilled by this sight of the sea after all their years in the wilderness.
The children who'd grown up in the wilderness had now become adults. It's most likely that they'd been put through courses of military training under Joshua's direction. This was a generation that would be bearing the bulk of the fighting when they came to enter Canaan. But even before then, there'd still be stiff opposition along the way, and it was going to test their resolve and their military capabilities to the utmost.
So off they set, northwards along this King's Highway. It's the world's oldest continuously used communication route. The main caravan route from the south to Damascus and Mesopotamia in the north. They were not the generation that had left Egypt. These were the children of that generation, and they'd grown up in the wilderness. Their parents had all died in that wilderness because of their constant provocation of the Lord. He had sworn in his anger that they would not enter the promised land. Their bones would whiten in the wilderness. The route passed first through the territory of the descendants of Esau, who lived in Seir, the land of the Edomites.
God told them not to provoke these, their blood relatives, to war, because he had already given Esau the hill country of Seir as his possession. So Moses sent a polite request to the king of Edom, asking for permission to pass through his land. Unfortunately, he refused, and he came out against them with a large and powerful army. This show of force caused Moses to turn aside and make a lengthy detour around Edom in order to avoid any chance of conflict with this brother nation.
In the same way, God told them not to harass the Moabites, further north, or the Ammonites. They too were blood relatives, descendants of Lot, and the Lord had given them their land as well. It was not to be taken over. Israel was to take over only those lands on this eastern side of the Jordan which were further north, in the hands of the Amorites.
It was here, near the border with Edom, that the Lord summoned Moses and Aaron to the top of Mount Hor, just over there behind me. He told Moses to take Aaron's garments and put them on Aaron's son Eleazar. Aaron was to die here. He would not enter the promised land because both he and Moses had rebelled against the Lord's commands at the waters of Meribah.
A Byzantine church and later an Islamic shrine tomb were built on the summit. The people of Israel mourned for Aaron for 30 days. Aaron is remembered particularly for the beautiful priestly blessing which the Lord commanded him to give to the people of Israel. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And so the epic journey continued, and they arrived at the Arnon, this great wadi that served as the border between Moab and the region of the Ammonites. It's no less awesome in its desolation today than it must have appeared to them then. The territory north of this great gorge was ruled by Zion, king of the Amorites.
Zion's capital was here at Heshbon. Once again, Moses sent a polite request, this time to Zion, asking permission to pass through his land. But Zion's response was a refusal. He turned out his full forces against Israel. But this time the Israelite forces stood their ground, and Zion's forces suffered an overwhelming defeat.
This was the Israelites' first decisive battle, and the new generation proved their mettle. They routed Zion's forces and captured Heshbon. Much of its tell is still awaiting excavation, but there's enough evidence here to suggest that this was indeed Zion's capital. They took not only this city, but then moved on further north to take all 60 of his cities. Israel was so proud of these victories against overwhelming odds that they celebrated them in their songs and psalms. They're a regular feature of the Passover celebration. Centuries later, an early Christian church was built on the tell itself. The ruins of its apse is still clearly visible. These caves in the hillside opposite have been the dwelling places of some of Heshbon's citizens through the ages. It's only recently that they've moved into the more modern accommodation above. Seeing the abundance of fertile grazing land here prompted the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh to ask Moses to give them this territory, the kingdom of Zion and Og, as their inheritance. Moses agreed, but only on condition that they cross the Jordan to fight with their fellow tribes for their own inheritance in the Promised Land. Its conquest must be the undertaking of all Israel. Then the 2.5 tribes could return to rejoin their families here in their possession on this eastern side of the river. So it was right here, on the plains of Moab, just north of the Dead Sea, that Israel were getting ready to launch their attack on Canaan.
Balak, king of Moab, was naturally terrified of Israel's presence, buoyed up as they were with their recent terrific success over Sihon. He didn't realize that Israel had no plans against him because God had forbidden such attack. He realized that there was no military way in which he could resist Israel, so he tried to oppose them through pagan divination. He sent for Balaam, a diviner with an international reputation.
So Balaam climbed 3 mountaintops around Mount Nebo to curse Israel for Balak. But he found he was unable to do so. God kept him from pronouncing a curse on his people. Instead, he found himself pronouncing the most exquisite blessings on them. How fair are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel, like valleys that stretch afar, like gardens beside a river, like aloes that the Lord has planted, like cedar trees beside the waters.
Balak, king of Moab, was furious. "What have you done? I brought you here to curse my enemies, and you've done nothing but bless them." Balaam's answer was simple. How can I curse those whom God has not cursed?
But he soon came up with his own plan for defeating Israel. He advised the Midianites, in league with Balak, to seduce the Israelites to engage in sexual immorality with the Midianite women and to worship their God. As a result, the Lord sent a plague on Israel in which 24,000 people died.
Then the Lord told Moses to take vengeance over the Midianites. So they fought against them, they killed every man, and the 5 kings of Midian, and Balaam himself. It was here, east of the Jordan, that Moses delivered his final address and instructions to the people of Israel. It was here that he uttered the words which were to become the most famous words in the Hebrew prayer book, uttered by Jews around the world to this very day. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength."
Here too Moses blessed the tribes. "There is none like God, O Jeshurun, who rides through the heavens to your help, and in his majesty through the skies. The eternal God is your dwelling place, and underneath are the everlasting arms.
And so the epic journey is almost over. Through the howling wilderness, across trackless deserts, God had led his people with a pillar of cloud by day and a
cross over into it.
If ever there was a moment of supreme triumph mingled with supreme disappointment, this must surely have been it. Triumph because he had led God's people from slavery to within actual sight of the promised land. Disappointment because he himself was not to be permitted to enter it. And yet, did he know, did this great man of God sense in his spirit that for him, God had prepared something even better? He would be crossing not this river Jordan, but the river of death, to enter not this promised land, but that heavenly land which God has prepared for all who love him.
This is the most revered site in Jordan, and the church complex and its beautiful gardens are lovingly tended by the Franciscan brothers. Beneath the modern roof lie the remains of several churches which have been built here over the centuries to commemorate the momentous climax of Moses' life. The apse itself is the oldest part. It was built in the 4th century. The altar legs of a later church still stand in its own apse, with the remains of yet another church behind. One of Jordan's best preserved mosaic floors beautifies the church on the left, while outside a plaque reminds us that while the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. This is graphically illustrated by the memorial marking the summit. It's a representation of the bronze serpent which Moses lifted up in the wilderness. All who had been bitten by snakes could look at it and live. Jesus said that in the same way he himself would be lifted up on the cross so that all who believe in his sacrifice might have eternal life. This is indeed a deeply significant site for Jews, Christians and Muslims, and to pray here in the church is for many an overwhelmingly moving experience.
And so here, on the top of Mount Nebo, Moses, the great prophet and lawgiver, died, just as his brother Aaron had died on Mount Hor. And in the valley opposite, he's buried. But no one knows the place of his burial to this day. It must be very close to me right now.
So now only the river Jordan stood between the people of Israel and the promised land. The Lord said to Joshua, "Get ready to cross the Jordan, you and all these people, into the land I am about to give them." As I was with Moses, so I will be with you." And so they crossed these waters to enter and inherit the promised land, the Ark of the Covenant shielding them from the river's deadly danger. Ever since then, believers have seen that event as a symbol of the day of our own passage through death. On that day, all our pretensions will be swept aside. All that will count on that day will be our faith and trust in the Lamb of God and in his sacrifice to bring us safe through Jordan to that promised land which God has prepared for all who love him.